Welcome to the Truth Bomber TV. We're talking about accidents and injuries today and what their spiritual meanings are, because nothing here is chance. And there are no accidents. There's only some purpose that we haven't yet understood. Absolutely positively. I'm going to break it down into three main things. Accidents are the consequence for falling into ego. So there is a guy who built this plane called the Draco. He is all over YouTube, and if you're into flying and pilot stuff, you may have heard of him. But he built this plane from the ground up. He designed everything. He has hundreds of hours in this plane. And he is taking off from the runway, and there is some heavy crosswinds going on, which he should have decided either to not fly that day or to pick a different runway. So in the video, which I'm going to link below in the description, he says and counts himself out for the mistake being his fault, which I like about the guy and why I used him as an example, because he can be accountable. I messed up. This is 100% my fault. I did this. So what happens is the universe and God has a really good way of showing us when we are egomaniacs that you're not in charge. So that's when we have the consequence of the accident. He completely destroyed his plane, which is basically like losing one of your children when you see what the guy has put into this. And so that's the consequence. You've got to have some kind of pain and suffering in order to sit there and look at yourself and say, you know, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. I was an egomaniac. And the same thing with sports injuries. They're usually from pushing yourself too hard, being an egomaniac, and all of a sudden you get hurt and you got to sit out on the sidelines. And this is definitely a great way for us to have time to think about what we have done. It's like God says, time for you to go to time out. You are not following the rules of staying in spirit, which you are supposed to push yourself, but not to the point of being an egomaniac. So it's nice when you can be accountable and you see why the consequences happen that create suffering. Now, the opposite of falling into ego is falling into self-hate, criticism, and rejection. If we mess things up and we get angry with ourselves about it and hate ourselves for it, we create repeat patterns, because until we can unconditionally love ourselves as the mistakes, the messed up things that we're supposed to be doing, the ways we reject ourselves, then the pattern will continue. And just an example of something recently, a friend of mine stopped by. He has a new truck and he dented up the tailgate of it, hauling a trailer. He just didn't compensate enough for the gooseneck. And so anyways, this is something that had happened to him before with a different truck. But that dent in the new truck is probably somewhere he's got some self-hate going on. So every time he looks at that dented up tailgate, he probably gets mad at himself and thinks, ugh, damn it, why did that happen to my brand new truck? And then he's mad at himself. So if we have these patterns of self-hate or criticism or rejection, that can also create repeat patterns of accidents. So something on the other side of the coin of ego, and we're trying to balance ourselves out here until we can unconditionally love ourselves, being imperfect and messy, then we will continue these repeat patterns where we attract what we hate back to ourselves through life situations and people and relationships. The next reason that you can have injuries or accidents happen is because you're not being present. You are thinking about the 100 million to-do list, your phone's ringing, you're And we're in like the century of overstimulation all the time. If we're not doing like 50 things at once, we're bored. And that is not always a good thing because it's hard to be really present and really focused on being in the now. And if we are not being present, that's when we get into accidents. That's when it's like, oh, the car is stopping in front of me and I didn't see it and now I rear-ended them. It also can happen just in accidents in general. My youngest daughter has a hard time being present, which I struggle with myself. So I definitely feel compassionate for her. But she's always running into stuff. She's always falling off of stuff or getting into some kind of accident. But her brain is moving a million miles a minute. And so it is doing something, but also doing 40 other things in its head. So this is a consequence, not being present, not being in the now. If we make judgments about people or lack compassion for other people, we have to be put in that position of being that person. So if, let's say, someone has some kind of physical injury or illness, and you're like, oh, it's all in their head, they just aren't trying or whatever, then you can be in that position of having some kind of physical thing happen to you that you cannot control, some kind of illness or something that goes on that no matter what you do or how hard you try, you cannot fix it. And so if we lack compassion for others or we create karma by making judgments, then we've got to be in that position. Even like homeless people. There are people that were hardworking and had houses and different things, but life comes along and sometimes medical bills become too much, or one partner gets sick, or things happen to people that make them end up homeless. So if we lack compassion for someone that's homeless, we may start the wheels of destiny to where we are homeless ourselves. And so these are just examples of ways that injuries and accidents force us to self-analyze and look at what we have done in order to stop doing it, stop falling into ego, be present, stop making judgments of other people. And then we can see a big shift in how accidents happen because we've learned our lesson. And just like Deepak says, once you understand what the universe, God, whoever you want to call the creator, is trying to teach you, then you can move out of the need for the suffering. So it's all by design, and we are responsible. As much as we want to blame other people or don't want to be accountable, it is all our fault, always. We are creating our reality on this TV planet Earth. So if we can fix what's going on inside, then we can move into bliss and joy and harmony and peace and love and all of these things that lead us out of suffering, which is where I want us all to go, into the Enlightenment era and new ways of consciousness. So I hope you have a great week, and this has taught you something about why maybe you might have some kind of accident or injury happen in your life.